Hi, this is Kelly with the Texas Land Agent. I work on a team called TexasLand, specialize in selling land all over Texas. I've done about 200 transactions and want to talk to you today a little bit about the transaction for you. Once you've picked a piece of land, what do you do next? So as a buyer, let's say you've poured over all the listings on the internet. There's a variety of different websites that you can look, some better than others. If you haven't gone through me, some worse than others. And so always keep in mind that once you've looked, you've found the land, then you have to make a strategic decision for what to do next. And so what do you do, right? The whole point is you want to make sure that when you're going to make an offer that you're looking for at least a good deal, maybe a great deal, but at the very least, you want a fair deal. So the only way to understand what to do next is to understand what the value of the property is. The price of the property on the internet won't tell you that. The price of the neighboring property on the internet won't tell you that. The way to understand price versus value is to think of them as two distinctly different things and figure out how to use one to inform the other and which one you need to make the best deal for you. And that is what we're going to try to find out today. So first, what is price? So price is the arbitrary amount that you see listed for the property. It's basically based on imagination. I mean, sometimes people will set the price for their property based on something that they've seen, as far as like what their neighbor is selling for, what they need to sell for, X amount over the value of what they owe still on their the loan on their property. In some ways, it's a pre-negotiation. So they're setting like 40% over, knowing that they're not great negotiators and they expect the price to ultimately end up at the end at this price. So what they really want is this, but what they've listed it for is this. Admittedly, that's a little confusing, but it happens all the time. I've seen that happen a lot. So price, the most important thing to remember, is nothing set in stone. It is literally something that the seller imagined into existence, and then it's our job to bring them down to earth and let them know what it's really valued at. So to understand value, you take a completely different approach. So value is based on data, it's based on historical fact, it's based on things that have happened and how that relates to what's going to happen in the transaction we're doing now. So value is what your lender is going to use. So in other words, if you come in and say, this is a beautiful piece of property, I love it, those rocks are amazing, these are my favorite trees in the whole neighborhood, I'm gonna go ahead and pay the seller's crazy asking price of X. The lender's gonna say, true, I get it, but the value is this. We're going to loan on this because that's what we could resell it for theoretically if we had to. So generally they're looking for the value being 20% higher than they think they could fire sell it for if they have to. So that's why you put down 20%. Theory being, if you stop paying, they take the land back, they can flip it quickly and immediately for that amount. So you have to decide, or we have to decide, how to calculate price versus value, calculate both, and decide in there what our offer price is so we can use each number to our specific advantage to make the right offer. Anytime I submit an offer on your behalf, I give all the data to the seller and the seller's agent to show justification for why we offered what we offered, why this is the best offer, and why they need to take it. So otherwise, it's just a number and a prayer, just an idea, just a concept, just a price, like we said, right? And the seller always thinks that our first number is always just an opening argument. So should you offer too low? I see a lot of buyers that do that. They just think, well, let's just offer really low and quote, see what happens. Well, exploratory offers are weak. They actually show the negotiation on the other side that you either A, don't understand the market, or B, don't understand negotiations, or C, maybe they just get offended and a lot of times they won't even come back to the table. So my job when I submit that offer is I explain in writing to them that this is the number that our bank and every other buyer's bank that comes along is going to use, and so the most that we can offer and the only way that's going to make the deal close. So if I have to, I'm going to remind them that every other buyer that comes after us is going to end up back at this number, if not before the appraisal, then definitely after the appraisal. So then why would we want to waste our time negotiating, escrowing, and just hoping the deal is going to close, knowing full well that it can't, or at least can't at that price? So if the agent did their job, then the seller already knows the number that I've submitted because our number is the correct number and the number that the deal would ultimately close at. So the seller would know this because the agent would have sat down in the listing presentation and sat there and actually explained the different numbers, why they arrived at the sales price, and why the appraisal is going to come in at this, and that's what they would actually do by having shared the numbers. If they did not do their job, then this is a great opportunity. So I've already submitted all the effort for them. They can take my numbers and my words, and they can use that to submit it to the seller and let them know what the reality of the transaction actually is. So by the same token, if the agent disagrees with me, hey, now we can actually start the discussion in an intelligent way. You can submit me back a written counteroffer, and in that offer, you can go back and pull your comps and justify the price that you actually listed it at, and let us feel confident that if we were to accept the offer, that it would actually be accepted because you have comps that disagree with mine. Now, the only thing I will tell you is that in over 200 transactions, that has literally never happened for me. Okay, so what happens if we know the value? I did my job, you understood the value, and you decide that you want to offer above that for whatever reason. You like the property enough, you're willing to justify it, right? I sent my comparable CMA, the seller's agent, but maybe we can't convince him to come up. He's not seeing the light of day, whatever. You decide you still want it. What happens then? Well, is it actually the seller's advantage? So some people would say, well, the seller's just gonna, quote, get more money. But what we found is that at the end of the day, if the seller actually takes an offer too high, we take the earnest money, we get it in escrow, we pay for a survey, God forbid we do some other due diligence, and then ultimately the appraisal comes in from the bank, and what ends up happening? Let's say it's $20,000 under, because the number I gave is correct and the number we offered is above. That $20,000 has to come from somewhere. So either the seller's gonna have to discount their price, which is that gonna happen? Or you're gonna come up. The one person that we know will not make their change is the lender. The lender's number is gonna be static, that's why I use it. So if you decide you wanna come above, great. You can do whatever you want, it's up to you. Just remember, even if you're not buying the property as an investment, it still is an investment. So you've gotta consider that. And if you're not willing to pay that extra when it comes in, don't bother making the offer. You're just wasting your time and money, and ultimately the property you want might end up selling during the time that we have this one under escrow for really no good reason. So like most things, there is a caveat to all this. This is actually how price versus value works in the really real world. But if you're buying a property that offers owner financing, then the seller doesn't have to use an appraisal. They can do whatever they want. So that means that they can charge whatever they want as long as they can find at least one buyer that's willing to pay it. And when they do a no credit check, flexible finance terms, great marketing, they can usually find at least one buyer to pay it. So then the question you have to ask yourself is, should you pay more for owner financing, which is usually 10 to 15% higher? That, of course, is completely up to you. I, as your agent, not surprisingly, will have some opinions on what you should do, maybe a whole pocket full of opinions, but I will at the end present whatever offer you ask me to offer because I'm your agent and that's up to you. So then how do you decide what to offer? So when I submit my CMA, it's gonna have three parts. So first, close price. So we're gonna use a mix of all the different closed properties in the area, what an average of those per acre prices are. Similar properties that have closed, and so then we'll take an average of that. We do use pending, although pending is really just gonna give you more of a better picture of volume. It's because we don't know what the pending price is, which is an important distinction. So we know what the sales price was, but not what the offer actually was accepted at. And then we've got on market. So I am gonna look at on market. I'm only gonna use on market really to give us a range there of what the difference is, but ultimately, again, the close value is what's most important. So then how do we figure out what the price is gonna be? So we're gonna take an average based on comparable, and then we're gonna add back in or subtract out what your property, the property we're trying to buy, has versus what the properties that are in my list had. So what do you use? Let's make that easy. So a bunch of different things. So does it allow animals? If it allows animals, that's gonna create something different as far as the usage of the property that will affect the value. Whether your neighbor's property allows animals, same thing. So neighboring properties, the size of the neighboring properties. Are you a 10-acre tract and a bunch of different 300-acre tracts? That's a different value. What's the usage? Are they running cattle next to you? Obviously that has a different experience of living next to a huge cattle place. Never driven through Artesia, New Mexico. Go give it a shot. Looks. So it's one of those simple ones. Like, what does it look like? Is it pretty? Like, is it interesting? Is it cool? Is there a great view? Is it generally look like a picture when you're there, or is it just a piece of dirt? One's not wrong than the other, but one's definitely more valuable than the other. Is it subdividable? So if you've got 20 acres and you can't subdivide it, and there's a 20-acre tract next to it on my comp list that you could, that affects the value. Mobile homes. Can you put mobile homes on your property? Is there a mobile home on your property? Is there a mobile home on the property next to you? Mobile homes are a big deal. So when we're going through the different price value calculations, we're gonna wanna know that for sure. Tax rate. So if everybody in there is that tax rate of $2, you come in and this property is $1.20, realistically, that adds some value to it, makes it more valuable. Is it in the city limits or the ETJ? That's gonna relate to taxes, obviously, but then also to oversight. It's more expensive to build in the city than it would be outside of the city. Generally, barring a few different things in there, but because of different factors, so take that in. restrictions, deed restrictions, covenants if you're in an HOA, a variety of different types of restrictions that limit your usage of the property. If the subject property that we were looking at has a different set of restrictions, that may affect the value, positive or negative. Peacocks. I actually had somebody reach out to me and want to do a peacock farm on one. And I was like, why would that be not a bad thing? Well, those things are loud and obnoxious. So if you have 100 peacocks living next to you or on your property, that's going to affect the value. Commercial zoning. So commercial property is generally worth more for the same dirt, just somewhat of a different place, but because of the fact that the highest and best usage is different, it therefore has a higher value. So easements, granted easements. Are there easements going all through the property? I saw a piece of property once that had an electric easement, a oil and gas easement, a water easement, and a gas pipeline through it, not counting all the typical like normal easements for setbacks and stuff around the outside of it. That property was less valuable and took a year and a half to sell because of all that. By the same token, does it take an easement to get to your property? That obviously is going to affect it. So if there's access, road frontage, that kind of thing. Surface leases, if you've got a variety of different surface leases of other people able to use your property for different things, that could detract from the value of the property. Oil and gas, is there an active lease? Is there an active well? Again, is there a pipeline that runs through it? All of those kinds of things make a big difference. I've sold property that had abandoned wells, so there's a liability there. What are you going to do with it? Technically, that's a negative valuation. Structures, are there structures there now? Were there structures there in the past? Well, can there be structures in the future, or could there never be structures? There are reasons for all those things that could be possible, so you need to know all that for the value. Wildlife, the ranches obviously will have unique and interesting wildlife. They'll do surveys on what's on there. What lives on your property can very well affect the value. Trees, that one's kind of an obvious one. It's one of the second or third questions most people ask me about a property to look at. Does it have trees? Can you plant trees? Do trees look good there? So that makes a big difference, whether they're small, medium, large, mature, non-mature, like me. Floodplain, the 100, 500, or what they call 1%, 2% now. If there's flooding on the property, that detracts from the value simply because you can't build on it. You can still use it for some things, but not everything. And if you limit the usage, you limit the value. The water table. If you have to drill a well in the water table, like it is south of San Antonio, you hit the Trinity Aquifer, it may cost you $80,000 to $100,000 to build a well. You can do the same thing in Colorado County, east of Houston, or west of Houston, and it's like maybe 100 feet down. So it's a humongous difference in the well, and that water table makes a difference. Soil composition, that's not one we see a lot, but definitely what's in there makes a difference for you to be able to build. If you're trying to use it for crops, clearly that's going to make a difference if you can or can't grow what you want to grow. So soil composition makes a difference. Major roads, distance to major roads. Does it have highway frontage? Can you get to the highway? Is it conveniently located, or is it in the middle of nowhere? Those things all add value or subtract value. Shape of the property, topography of the property. So if it's I've seen ones where there's literally a piece here, piece here, strip here, all the way around the back. That's different than a perfect square with a bunch of frontage. So that affects the value as well. Utilities. So this is one that I've done other videos on. Do you have access to utilities? Do you have utilities connected? You can be talking about tens of thousands of dollars just in that simple conversation. And that, of course, is going to affect the value. Fencing. Fencing is one people forget about, but you're $3 to $15 a foot, depending what you build. So if you've got a perimeter of 2,000 feet, that's a huge expense that you have to consider, especially considering, is it already there? Do we have partial fence, full fence? Is it a nice fence? Does it need to be a replaced fence? These are all things that add value. Water feature, probably the first question that people ask, maybe the second, is there a pond? Is there a creek? Is it a major waterway? Is it near a lake, or is it waterfront in general? All of those things that add or subtract value as well. So what we have to do is, or what I do, is I'm going to present that CMA to the seller with all of my data of the different properties that we looked at, why our property is better or worse. Clearly, we're going to find ways to make it better. And then we're going to adjust that value up from the traditional per square foot price or down in this case of buying, up in the case of selling. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do, is use these numbers to get the right answer, but a good answer and to your benefit. So making the right offer at the right valuation makes the entire process of buying and selling Texas land more transparent and a lot less stressful. So before you go out there and just throw numbers around and hope and pray, make sure you learn the difference between price and value, learn the process, and learn the marketplace. Of course, you can always just call me and I'll help you.